Welcome to the Founding Voices podcast, a series of conversations with the humans who showed up before there was a map. I'm Perry, founder of the Octopus Movement, and I believe nonlinear thinking is not just a way of creating possibilities, it's a way of being in the world. Each week, I speak with three founding members of our global human mycelium to explore who they are, why they think differently, and how they're shaping a future that cannot be built in straight lines. Well, let's meet today's guest. Today, um, this is an awesome guest, and I remember very well when I met Jeff for the first time. Today's guest is someone I met in a place where perspective literally changes everything. It's at the NASA company. Jeff Wolfe is not just an imaging engineer. He's someone who has spent his career solving problems from impossible angles, from reducing canopy reflections while photographing from an F-16 to design complex image distribution systems. But here is what makes Jeff extraordinary. For years, he assumed everyone processed problems the way he did until he realized that they didn't. As a dyslexic thinker, Jeff discovered that the real issue inside organizations is not disagreement about solutions. It's that people are starting from an entirely different cognitive perspectives. He didn't see deficiency, he saw structural differences. And that changed everything. Jeff became a founding member of the Neurodivergent Employee Resource Development and Support Group called Nerds. I like that. And began researching cross neurotype communication through design thinking. Today, through Unbox Mindz, he designed environments that work with different minds instead of against them. Jeff doesn't talk about neurodiversity, he builds systems that allow it to function. Jeff, welcome to the podcast today. How about that for an introduction?
Hello, thank you, Perry. That's a big thing to follow up there, but I appreciate it.
Are you ready for it? I think it's so, as a photographer, and we talked about that in the past, as a photographer, as a dyslexic thinker myself, it's always so much fun to hang out with you and to discuss all kinds of things, and especially also design thinking, which I think is a very interesting topic, what we use at our think tank of the Octopus Movement as well. So I have so many questions for you, Jeff. Welcome to this podcast.
Thank you.
First question first. I always ask the same question first. Can you describe the octopus in you? If you would take a photograph of your octopus, meaning your nonlinear thinking, how would that look like? It's an impossible question, maybe, but just what are your thoughts about how your octopus looks like?
Well, for me, I sort of am in a place where there's this constant curiosity. So if I'm an octopus, I'm always reaching for different things with each tentacle. I'm finding things, I'm looking at things, I'm trying to absorb ideas, look for patterns, look for predictability in them, how things can come together. So that's sort of what my mind does naturally. So I think that would be what the octopus would be for me, would be always sort of, and I do that all the time. I'm doing testing, right? I get an idea and I go, will that fit here? Will that fit here? So I'm always digging, exploring, and finding things.
That's a wonderful description of your inner octopus. There is a new book coming out with the Octopus Organization, where organizations should have more of this adaptability and curiosity. How do you see that yourself, knowing yourself and knowing how we work in today's world and how organizations are structured? How would you see that octopus organization?
Well, the thing is, a lot of organizations are very fixed in what their approaches to things. So a lot of it is bringing in that flexibility, which is perfect with the octopus because it is a very flexible creature. So organizations need to understand that the cognitive styles are different for the different employees and things that they employ. And so I like, what was it, the CEO of Pelletier talked about the outlier skills, or outlier capabilities. We need to understand that. So organizations sort of need to step back and take the time to understand who the people are, how their minds work, things like that. And I know it can be very challenging for them to do.
Let's dive deep in this. If you could adjust the aperture of how humanity sees neurodiversity, what would you whisper in a global lens? Well, this question, I prepared this question because I think it's so spot on for you. It means um, we as humanity, sometimes, in my opinion, we have a strange way how we see neurodiversity or how we see people that don't fit in the box.
Mm-hmm.
If you could whisper something to humanity in explaining what they should see than what they're seeing right now, what would that be? Because I think this is one of the key elements in the world that we need to discuss.
Mm-hmm. Well, that kind of goes back to some of the things we've talked about before, because it's why don't people see what I see? That's been a question that's been puzzling me my entire life. So I've been working on different things, and that's where I discovered design thinking, where I found certain things. So people need to understand that when they approach something or when they're in a room, that not everybody's on the same page they are, that there are cognitive differences, whether it's perception, different things like that people have. So, and their minds work differently. So one person may key off of a word in the conversation and go off on it, thinking something, and they may seem like they're not there, but internally they're working in their mind. So you need to understand that when you talk to people or say something to people, patience, give them time, and try to understand where they're at. And you never know what wonderful thing, or who knows what ideas will come out of people if you just do that. Sometimes in the neurodivergent world, we do things that are looked at negatively when all we're trying to do is understand. We may step away or do something, and it's impacted as, oh, that person's not paying attention, or that person's not doing this. That's not it at all. We're just processing. We're taking time. We're trying to understand things. And then when we ask clarification questions, it's not because you said something wrong. It's just we're trying to understand. So we need to make sure that people just take the time to really look at other people and understand other people.
You just said, you see things differently than others. When did you become aware of that? Because it doesn't start that way, when you're a child or you go to school and you're not, I see things differently, because that's not always clear in the beginning. There's always noise and a gray area before you start realizing, wait a second, I see things differently. When did that happen for you, and why did that happen? Do you remember?
Well, I think it's because early in my career I was a photographer, so I was out working on my own and didn't have a lot of interaction. So that was just sort of gave me freedom. But when I moved into engineering is when I noticed it, because then I started working in teams, working with people, and I would come home frustrated, talking to my wife, they're just not seeing this. What am I doing wrong? So I internalized it, trying to go, okay, what's happening? Because I think I'm communicating this correctly, but it's just they're not seeing it. So that was my first big thing when I started moving into engineering and working in teams. So then that's when I discovered design thinking. I started looking at ways to bring it in. However, at that time, I wasn't very well versed in some of the methodologies and things, so I wasn't doing it very well. So that's why I went back to school to try to understand things. And it's during that journey that I really started looking at different aspects or points in my life where I saw things that other people didn't. And it started making sense to me. Things just started to click. So an example of that would be years ago, I was in a meeting and they were trying to organize imagery content across the agency. And they had 30 plus people in a meeting and they were having difficulty. The speaker said, there's a problem with the structure. And that word stuck in my head. And after the meeting, I went, okay, explain this to me. So then he talked about metadata, how things weren't structured, things like that. So then I wrote a white paper on metadata standards, which I later developed into the agency level metadata standard that was working today. But out of the 30 plus people in the room, I was the only one that saw that. So doing a lot of reflective thinking and looking at points like that in your life has really helped me understand how my mind works.
And you were triggered also based on one word, maybe even, right? And not
Right.
the word by itself, but the placement of the word in the whole conversation. Then all of a sudden that word pops up and it triggers everything in your thinking. But
Yeah,
now,
exactly.
but now the question, people see us as people with dyslexia. And I ran into someone who said to me, "Oh, do you know this book?" And I said, "No, I don't know this book." He said, "Oh, yeah, forget about it. You're dyslexic, so you don't read any books."
Right.
It's just hilarious, right? People have, and then what is so interesting is that language, for me as well, I love language, I love words, I love what something means and what it can trigger. But people don't understand that it works in our brain like that, even though we have dyslexia. So what's going on in our minds, Jeff? What's how weird is our minds? We have sometimes difficulty in reading what it's exactly saying, and on the other hand, we can be triggered by just one word and all of a sudden connect everything. What do you think is going on in our brain?
Well, a lot of that I think has to do with the plasticity of our minds, because even though we're not using, like when we read, we're not using the primary aspects of our brain in the same manner that other people are, our brain sort of connects differently. So that when we see things, read things, do stuff like that, sometimes it goes, just kind of goes through different cogs in our mind. We're just sort of looking and understanding. So I think that's what my mind does, at least. So
Do you think, I often think about creativity and innovation, and I think efficiency kills innovation. And I think there's such a focus on being more efficient in today's world, especially now AI is everywhere, and AI is, of course, the god of efficiency in a way. How do you see that? How is efficiency killing innovation for you?
well, I think there's multiple things there occurring. It's like it starts in education, like in this country, where there's a confirmation type of behavior. Do this, get a star, do this. So we sort of have people try to fall into patterns early in life. So then when we get into companies, we're hired for a certain role, a certain spot or something, a certain list of things that we may or may not fit perfectly well with. But then we fall into a compliance driven behavior environment where somebody's in the room, I can't say this, or there's something happening. So those things like that just kill creativity, and they impact trust. They do all kinds of things that sometimes we're just not aware of.
And how does it work at NASA? Because it's the same thing when I talk about nonlinear thinking. People always say, "Well, I hope my doctor is a very linear thinker." And then I was in the hospital with a brain infection, and my neurologist used some nonlinear thinking to cure me. So I don't necessarily agree with the fact that all doctors need to be very linear in that way. I think a lot of people are curious about that efficiency within NASA as well. And I talk a lot about 65, the space race, and that NASA did the research, where can we find the most brilliant creative minds, and those were kids and not adults. But how does efficiency work in an organization like that, where innovation and different thinking is so essential to make process and progress?
Well, what I've sort of found in my group, I can't speak to everything, but there are certain nonlinear minds in the groups, and it's a higher average than normal. So normal, you're looking at 20% across the global populations, whereas sometimes in a lot of tech fields, it can be 40 to 45% of the people in your group that are neurodivergent. A lot of them don't publicly say anything because there's still stigma associated with being, whether you're autistic, ADHD, something like that. But what's interesting is there are little tribes that pop up. So people know who to go to find certain solutions and to talk through certain things. So even though there's a certain organizational level, it's like sort of we find each other and we know who thinks like we do, and we form these little organizations that sometimes work behind the scenes a little bit, and it's sometimes interesting to see. But I think overall, uh, they try to be very creative and adaptive when they look at problems, like most organizations do. But then it's the common thing, the compliance-driven behavior. There's certain things that can get in the way, certain structures. So I think everybody across the board is struggling with that right now because they don't understand how to create those environments.
So does it mean that there is a box for out of the box thinking, more or less? Saying that there are groups, like if you really want to have a creative solution for something and the standard is not working, you go to these kind of people. For me, that feels like there is a box for going outside of the box.
Well, that's where I have problems with labels. I
Yeah.
really push back a lot on the understanding of that. Now, when you hire somebody, you're putting them in a box, but yet you're hiring them for the things they can do outside of the box. How does that make sense? It's like, okay, isn't that contradictory? But then, so you build teams based on skills, but then there could be outlier capabilities within that group that you don't understand, that you don't see. So how can you box people when you truly don't understand them? It's role based. So we're still looking at things in a very old way, and we need to move beyond that.
So if it's role based, then would you say that it would be a very good thing to have more nonlinear thinkers in leadership?
I think so, but they need to be in leadership in a way to where they're not masking. And there are a lot of people in leadership that are nonlinear that still mask, and they don't come out, they don't talk about it. So that's where you don't have that trust. And so sometimes creativity is built on having an environment where you can have trust and you can talk. And when you don't have that, people won't say what's on their mind because they can be worried about, well, if I say this, this will happen, or if I do something. So that's where sometimes leadership doesn't come across as being approachable, because it's like they don't have conversations like we're having right here.
Would it be cool to create some kind of hype around leadership being very nonlinear and in the space of neurodiversity or whatever you want to call it? Because I I I I agree with you. If there's not a authentic self in leadership, why would you be vulnerable yourself in that relationship with your boss, your manager, whatever you want to call it?
Mm-hmm.
Um, why is that still, what do you think it's, why is that still so difficult? Why within leadership is there so much masking going on to not really show themselves? And you just spoke about Palantir. The CEO of Palantir is maybe a very good
Mm-hmm.
example of that. People on social media are asking on what kind of drugs he's at, right? What kind of drugs is this dude taking? That's all they can say about him. And on Wikipedia, it says he is a dyslexic thinker, but I think there's a high level of ADHD involved, at least, and maybe some other elements as well. So, what's the difficulty here in having leadership without a mask? What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's because they're in that confirmation conforming type of society, where there's a certain pipeline that they go down in order to be in the role that they're in. It's so based off of that particular mold they have to fit that sometimes it's challenging to speak outside of it. So, and sometimes too, some of the things I've been working on is people don't truly understand themselves. And so that's been part of my journey, really looking at how my mind works, understanding myself so that I can bring myself into the different environments that I work in. So then if a person reacts a certain way, I can go, oh, well, let me rephrase that, or let me know. So that's part of it, I think.
How can we use a telescope for ourselves, not just to see Mars and galaxies that are absolutely awesome? And I love the work you're doing. And I was at NASA to do the keynote, and I love doing that. And now in conversation with the European Space Agency, space is just so wonderful, but we're looking so far away. And shouldn't be also create an agency like NASA, but then to look inwards to help
Mhm.
people to use their personal telescope in understanding themselves. Because I think you're absolutely right. We have no clue who we are sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
How
we
could we
do.
do that? How could we create an image of ourselves that we start to understand ourselves in a really true, inspiring, interesting way? Because at school, it's not happening that much. So, how would we create an agency who could do that?
Well, sometimes it can be very simple. So let me explain it to you this way. Okay, I don't know how much you know the Lord of the Rings. It's one of my favorite things of all times. But there's a part in the book where Sam and Frodo are separated by Gollum, and Frodo gets knocked out by Sheila, by the big spider, and Sam picks up the ring. Okay, and in the book you can hear the dialogue between the ring and Sam. So all Fram wants is something very simple. He wants to have a garden, but the ring uses that to magnify it and to corrupt him. So you can be the chief gardener of the world, and it shows visions and stuff in his head, so that it tries to corrupt him. But Sam understands himself. He's very grounded. So then when he gets the ring back to Frodo, they head towards Mount Doom, but then Frodo tries to give it to him again, and Frodo turns it down. He steps away from it because he understands himself. So then he carries Frodo up to the cave, and at that point is where Frodo breaks. He's overloaded. So when you look at that, you have Samwise, who he doesn't look for anything outside of himself. He tries to understand what his self-motivations are. And then you have Frodo, who's overwhelmed by the journey because he's invested so much of himself in it. So you have to understand where you invest yourself, understand the simple things in your mind, and don't let things like the ring or things like like this that try to influence you. Try to understand that so that you know where you're going, kind of thing. Does that make sense? Does that little journey make sense?
Very much. And I'm thinking about what's happening in the world right now, where some very nasty, ugly people are in the spotlights thanks to files that are open and everybody can read. I'm thinking, listening to you, are those people who are really on the dark side of life? Would you say that they don't really know themselves very well, and this could be a result as well? Do you
Mhm.
understand what I mean?
Exactly, because if you don't understand yourself, you're letting a lot of outside forces make decisions for you. So that goes down to a question you can ask yourself. If you ask yourself, what should I do? You have external forces acting on you, because should is based on external input coming in. But if you ask what may I do, then you're thinking for yourself. You're not letting external factors. So a lot of times people that get into positions like that, positions of power, are more concerned about the should, the outside influences, than they are with the may. So, and working from the inside out. So that's the problem. People don't understand how to flip that. They're getting influenced by so much external forces that they kind of lose themselves, and then they have a hard time going forward.
And you just said earlier, Jeff, like, what's wrong with me? And I discovered in several research papers that the question you ask yourself, what is wrong with me, is one of the most powerful questions you can ask. And I can I'm not afraid to create the statement that the nonlinear thinker, the neurodivergent mind, is better aware of themselves. So this is very weird. We are being seen as weird in the world, but these weird people understand themselves better than the people that are actually being seen by society as normal. That's weird to me. Not the weird people, but that the question you ask yourself, what's wrong with me, triggers so much. And if that question keeps coming back, it's not a one-time question. It keeps coming back
Mhm.
when you're at school and like, this is not working. What's wrong with me? It triggers the investigation and the curiosity into your own mind, and really allows to open the door in who am I, right?
Mhm.
It's that question. What's wrong with me triggers a lot of things. And I wish some people on this planet should have asked themselves what's wrong with me.
Right. And that's an aspect of it too, because sometimes it's different with people that are late diagnosed versus early diagnosed. I'm an early diagnosed dyslexic person, so I was in special ed classes and things like that. So it led to a lot of internalization of what was going on in my life.
Me too. Yeah.
So I was trying to understand things. But that can be destructive if you let it be. So you can't let things like that affect your worth. You need to understand that your worth is not based on other people's perspectives of you. Your worth is something that you carry regardless. And that took time for me to understand as well, because, when you're picked on, bullied, all these things are happening as a young child, you don't understand what's going on. So now where I'm at in life, I can reflect and look back at that, like you're saying, and truly kind of understand what was going on. And that's where there tends to be a breakdown. People don't do a lot of that reflective thinking, so that they don't understand themselves. But neurodivergent people tend to, because we're trying to fit in. We're always looking for workarounds. We're trying to see, okay, I said this, what's happened. So we're, again, asking questions, and that's what keeps us more creative, I think, is because of that questioning and that internal dialogue that we have.
Talking about questioning and internal dialogues, what are you curious about today, Jeff, in your life? I know you're very busy. Lots of things are happening with yourself and what you're doing and at work. But what is something you're very curious about right now?
I've been trying to look at different psychological models of the human mind to try to understand how people think. Also looking at how the mind works. We take in data from the senses and things that we have. So I've been looking at that and sort of developing a tool that can be used to help for self-awareness, so that people understand themselves and then they understand the different areas in their life. So when they go into that, they don't have to deal with a lot of this, as much stigma as like someone like I did or you did. So it's kind of a tool, but yet the thing is, it's not just for nonlinear people, it can be for anybody. So it's something that can really help them understand themselves and understand the environments and things that they function in.
And what I love about what you're doing, and I know a little bit on what you're doing, is that in many cases, the objective is the tool, to create a tool, and that's not the case with you. There is so much more going on, and creating a tool is an element of the bigger picture for you. And I love that, because if something just is a tool, then it's just a tool, and it's missing all kinds of opportunities, I think. And what you're creating is very awesome. I'm a huge fan of that. So
Thank you.
keep going, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm
What
hoping
is?
to have
Yeah, so go
I'm
ahead.
hoping to have it out sometime this year, but it's not bubbled to the top of my priorities yet. So
It will come when it comes, and we will support it big time at the Octopus Movement, because I think again, it's very cool. I love it. Considering time, one final question, one of my favorite questions as well. If you could whisper a sentence into someone's ear, and magic happens, and every human being on the planet will hear that sentence in their own language, what kind of sandwich, or what is this the sentence? I said sandwich, that's weird. What what sentence would you whisper into everybody's ear?
I would probably be something like, you're a very unique individual and there's not necessarily something wrong with you. That's the journey. That's the understanding. So you have to be able to do that. So, growing up thinking there's something wrong with me, it can be devastating. So you need to get past that. You need to understand that it's not necessarily you. There could be something, whether it's socially, culturally, who knows, that is impacting you. And your mind is very unique. So you need to understand that uniqueness and not let it, either the inner chatter or what you hear, impact you in ways that are harmful.
I agree, and I really hope, Jeff, we can we can create some kind of inspiring movement for leadership to throw away the mask, and be a leader as they want to, within themselves and with their nonlinear minds, because I think that would benefit everything, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you for being here, Jeff, not only in this podcast, but also as a founding member of our Octopus Movement. If you're listening out there and you feel a spark please follow it. Nonlinear thinking is not a strategy, it's a kind of love, and it grows where we share it. And that's what we talked about. So let that nonlinear thinking also be there in leadership and at the office, etc. Let's talk about it. Let's remove the mask. Thank you, Jeff, for being here. And I'm
Thank you.
looking forward what will happen this year with the things you've created. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me.